Regulation is one that is still sort of a hot button issue, actually. Regulation is not something that's going to go away, although it possibly should. Regulation is something that's still being explored as an option when we're talking about different currencies, such as, in this case, Bitcoin. Now, the problem with regulation is it assumes control. Regulation means there actually has to be control. If we're talking about regulation, meaning there must be coercion, which I am fundamentally against. So it's kind of it's a bad situation for everyone, essentially. When we're talking about a currency being regulated, that's not as positive a thing as we might think. When we think of a currency being regulated, we're thinking, well, it's going to stop drug deals, it's going to stop this or that from happening, and it's going to be positive overall. The problem is, even in a heavily regulated currency system like we have here in the States, we're still seeing, say, economic collapse. We're seeing huge amounts of corruption. We're seeing all sorts of different problems occurring that still probably might happen if it was deregulated, but also the effects might be a little bit lessened if there was deregulation. And that's something that has to be understood, is that regulation does not always equate to actual total control, or does not always equate to a positive change, because we see that a lot where we see, say, regulation on firearm sales, but that doesn't mean that people are going to stop dying from gunshot wounds. It doesn't happen. That's not how it works, because still people can buy weaponry on a black market. Or, say, drugs are heavily regulated. The buying and selling of drugs, even and especially pharmaceuticals, is heavily regulated, and yet still people buy OxyContin on the black market, and still people, hillbilly heroin, as I call it. People are still getting all sorts of illegal is in quotes, plants and such, through black market sources. Just your next door neighbor happens to sell pot that he grows in a green room, in some sort of growing room in his garage. And that's technically illegal. That's deregulated too. It's a deregulated market, the black market is. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's a negative, and it doesn't mean that because something is actually regulated, that means there's going to be complete control over it, or it's going to be a positive thing, because it's not, and it doesn't actually work. That's the thing. People think that if we could just control this or that, then everything would be okay. And it doesn't work that way. People think that, well, if we just pass this law, or if we just get this regulation passed, then everything will be okay. It doesn't work that way, though. That's not how regulation works. Regulation just means there's a board that determines how things are going to work. And that board might be corrupt, or it might not be. And that board might have certain goals that are not the goals of the people, or it might not. So we see problems like that all the time. We see problems like this arising every single day. Think about the regulation of, say, drugs here in the States, where most Americans think that marijuana should be legalized, funnily enough. And I mean, I'm not making that up. Most Americans who have been polled anyway do believe that marijuana should be legalized, and yet it's not. So obviously the regulation does not work in the favor of the people, or in the interests of the people, would be a better way to put it. Because you may agree or disagree on whether or not marijuana should be legalized, but we're only using that as an example. So a majority of people want it to be deregulated, or at least legalized, and yet it's not, because DEA makes money off of it, which is quite a corrupt system. Local police departments and sheriff's offices make money off of arrests and fining people. So obviously the regulation does not work in the favor of the people. It's obvious at this point. So the same goes with money, where it's illegal, say, for instance, to gamble. You can't actually gamble privately in your friend's house who's, say, a doctor who wants to put $30K down on whether or not he wins his poker game. That's technically illegal, and you can be arrested and fined quite a bit of money if it's found out that happens, even though really no one's being hurt, and it's all under consent, and everyone understands the risk involved, $30K. So what's the problem, really? Nobody's being harmed, and it doesn't really matter. But this is still a control on money. It's a regulation. So regulation does not mean that it's somehow going to fix all of our problems, because it's not, and it can't. Because, believe it or not, all of our problems can't be solved. That's the thing. This is a fundamental thing that people have to understand, is no matter what the regulation is, bad things are still going to happen. Now, you might possibly lessen bad things happening with regulation, but chances are you're actually not, And also, it's going to lead to a lot of other bad things happening because of the regulation, due to corruption or due to drug gangs shooting at each other because the DEA has put controls on it, and thus it's a hot commodity, whatever the case may be. Insider trading becomes a problem now, even though regulation can't stop it. Regulation can't stop insider trading, despite the fact that it's illegal. Probably out of the many people who have gotten caught for insider trading, many more have not. So regulation doesn't actually fix anything. It doesn't help any. So what's the point, really? Why even bother having these? Why even bother having these regulations if they're not going to do any good? And that's the fundamental question that needs to be asked: is why do we bother having all these regulations and all these rules if they don't actually do any good and they don't actually fix any problems? This is yet another excuse to add more layers of rules, more layers of regulation, so that somebody somewhere in some office can benefit from it. And that's the point, is that we're not benefiting from any of this. That's the thing. We're not. And I'm not in that system. I'm not somebody who's going to want to exploit the money system so I can say, well, I want there to be no regulation so that I can do this or that. Because really, I don't want to do much of anything when it comes to deregulating things. There's not really much of anything I want to do that I would benefit from things being deregulated. Guns, as an example. I probably wouldn't buy a fully automatic weapon just because it's impractical. It's expensive, prohibitively, and I really have no use for one. I don't really want one. But I will recognize that if you want one, you're not going to hurt anybody with it. Who cares if you own it? I mean, seriously, who cares if you own it? So deregulation is really not going to hurt anybody, it seems. Who cares if you want to go own a gun and you're a responsible person, but you're 16? Well, under current law, you can't go and buy a gun if you're 16. I'm not 21. I'm 20. I can go and buy a rifle in the state of Georgia, but I can't buy a handgun in the state of Georgia because I'm not 21. So 1 year's difference is not going to make any difference. I can guarantee you. I'm not going to think that much differently a few months from now than I did last month. Things aren't going to make any sort of difference at all between that period of time and the period of time sometime in the near future. I'm not going to think any differently. I'm not going to be much of a safer person. It's just a number. It doesn't matter, and it speaks nothing to my mentality. Same goes for buying alcohol. I'm not going to say I've never had anything to drink, because who hasn't had something to drink under 21? I guarantee you a majority of teens have had something to drink under the age of 21. Now, I'm not going to say that I have, but we'll leave it at that. So it doesn't make any difference at all to just put a number on it and say, well, this is the number, and we're determining that that's the number, and that's just how it is. It doesn't make any sense at all. And even so, it's not actually a federal thing. It's a state thing. And it used to be there were some states where 18 was the legal drinking age. Canada actually makes a lot more sense with this, where it's 19. And I guess the idea is that you're out of high school. And I can understand that. But what if you graduated high school early and you're a very mature person? Suddenly these regulations are oppressing you, because even though you're a very mature person and you would always drink responsibly, you can't because there's some regulation saying you shouldn't. It's not a moral question. It's just a question of papers. And that's all it is. It's a question of numbers, not morality. Because there's nothing morally wrong with a 16-year-old having a beer one weekend, not even getting drunk, just enjoying a beer one weekend. And that's all there is to it. I don't see anything morally wrong with that. And there's no reason for regulations to prevent that. What's the problem? The problem would be public drunkenness. Now, I can understand that. That is not a good thing. And if you're creating a public disturbance, sure, that's a problem. But being underage and consuming a drink which happens to have a chemical in it, which when consumed in excess can cause intoxication, is not actually a problem. So who cares? So it's a silly thing. My favorite example of that really sums it up is with driver's licenses, where currently I have a valid driver's license, and I think it's valid until like 2 or 3 years from now. So I have a driver's license that is in fact valid, and I can drive just fine. In fact, I'm actually a pretty good driver. Everyone I know, anyone who's driven with me, has at least not said anything negative about my driving, and I've had people compliment my driving, but this is not about me. What if I'm driving and I realize yesterday my license expired? So am I suddenly a really bad driver who's not fit to drive? Well, no, I'm not. I'm actually still a good driver. My driving skill has not changed, and in fact is going to improve as I drive more, license or no. So why do I need a piece of plastic telling other people that I'm okay to drive, even if it expires? Why not just have it be a lifetime thing? Why? Because they make money off of it. And that's all there is to it. It's about money. That's what it's always about. It's always about the green rectangles. I'm rubbing my my thumb and two fingers together to signify money being made. That's all there is to it. That's what regulation is all about. It's about making money. And that's all there is to it. It's as simple as that. Regulation is about making money. It's not about protecting anybody. Because you really think that the guys in the regulatory office in some government agency actually really care about protecting the people. They don't. They couldn't care less if somebody gets wrecked because there was some regulation or deregulation that caused them to get scammed or something like that. They don't care. It's all about making the money. It's about the counting. It's not about actually protecting people. And that's where the soul of it is gone. There is no soul to government. There's no soul to the state. There's no caring behind it. And that's just the nature of it. It's a machine. It's not even an organism because an organism lives. It's a machine. It's a computer of sorts. And it's a very corrupt one. It has a lot of malware, lots of spyware. It needs to be refreshed, perhaps. But unfortunately, we're kind of stuck with it as it is now. Well, this is Digital Drive here on Hot News Talk Radio. I'm your host, Russell. We're talking about technology and quite a bit more. That's probably one of the longest intros ever, by the way. 6 to 9, we have a great program here. That's Daybreak USA. 9 to 11 is David Tulis here. He's live and he's local. He talks about local economy and free market. Then we have the Mr. Judd show, which was filled in by Confederate Mike today. He talked about the air show and talked a little bit about Commander Timothy White, the Navy commander who's being investigated anyway for allegedly using his firearm to try to stop a potential, or not potential, but a terrorist threat at a recruiting center. After that, of course, is me, Digital Drive. And then we have from 1 to 2, Clutch with Keon Rose, where he talks about sports and all sorts of other things in an actually very engaging way. It's engaging to me, even though I don't carry a whole lot of interest in sports. Not that I don't have any, but I don't carry a whole lot. And he actually manages to make it very interesting, even to me, a layman. So it's a very good show. 1 to 2, Clutch with Keon Rose, right here on Hot News Talk Radio. Then we have Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity, Hot News Live at 5, American Now, Ground Zero, and Coast to Coast AM with George Noory, all right here on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240, and hotnewstalkradio.com. Another problem that we have with regulation and with control is the patent system, which is markedly broken, decidedly broken. The patent system that we have today, because now we have something called patent trolls, and those are really fun. Now, patent trolls are people who buy up patents, or companies which buy up patents and then sue people when there's a so-called, anyway, violation of that patent. That would be a patent troll. Now, what happens is these patent trolls, and in fact, there are entire companies dedicated to patent trolling, which make tons and tons and tons of money, despite the fact that they've never actually innovated anything. They just own patents to different things. And they own the idea of building something. They haven't actually built it. They just own the idea to build something. And it's kind of a corrupt system, actually. The regulation is very corrupt. Well, there's a patent trolling company that's been schooled by Newegg, which is a computer hardware selling company, over a shopping cart patent. And now, because they lost the case, they're suing their own attorneys. Sovereign Software, which is a Chicago-based patent holding company, has been denounced on Capitol Hill and made tens of millions of dollars by suing retailers with a patent on online shopping carts. Now, a shopping cart online, we're all familiar with. When you buy something on, say, Amazon or your favorite online retailer, there's a virtual shopping cart which houses all the different things that you've put into your virtual shopping cart. So at checkout, you can buy all of them in one go without having to put, buy this item, buy this item, buy this item. Instead, you put it into your virtual shopping cart, and then you buy them all at the same time. Pretty cool. Well, there's actually a patent on that idea, and it's held by a company which doesn't actually act as an online retailer, which is, well, a little bit weird. So Sovereign Software is the name of that. Now, Sovereign is in what may be the final legal fight of its life with its own lawyers. Sovereign employed the law firm Jones Day, which is the nation's largest, from 2004 to 2010. And at that point, the mega firm decided to stop representing Sovereign. So a lawsuit was filed last month in Illinois state court showing that Sovereign, which has no discernible business beyond filing patent lawsuits, continues to be in a serious dispute with its former law firm. In the lawsuit, Sovereign claims that Jones Day's withdrawal was wrongful and resulted in damages to Sovereign, and also the parties disagreed on what amount of fees, if any, were due to Jones Day at the time of its withdrawal. Now, something that's interesting about the patent system that should be pointed out is that it's not really working in the way that it was intended to work back in the day, at its inception. The idea of patents is not a new one. See, what happened with patents was, patents were designed to give you an exclusivity period for a limited amount of time. So you could recoup your losses in R&D, research and development. So let's say that, as an example, you have designed the light bulb. You are Thomas Edison. Now, you haven't actually really designed the light bulb, but you and your research team have designed the light bulb. And now you own the patent for the light bulb. This gives you an exclusivity period to recoup your losses. And then that technology goes into what's called public domain. That's where public domain comes in, by the way. So the patent system was actually only meant to give you an exclusivity period of, I think, like 2 years. It wasn't very long at all. So that being the case, then the patent system has been changed quite a bit over the years, and now there are patents and copyrights, which are a little bit different, which are on intellectual property, not physical inventions. There's patents and copyrights which can last potentially hundreds of years. So a company can own a patent for hundreds of years on something that is really not that innovative, like an online shopping cart. That's really not original to any one company per se. It's not even really an idea other than it's a virtualization of an already existing technology, which is to say a shopping cart. So it's totally broken. The whole idea is totally broken, but it continues today, and it's very heavily regulated. Unfortunately, yet another example of regulation actually hurting innovation and hurting business, because you can have a really good idea, but some other company can be sitting on the patent for that idea and sue your pants off, even though that company has no intention to ever innovate on that patent. And so your innovative idea, which may slightly resemble a patent from 20 years ago, gets beaten down, and your company goes bankrupt trying to fight this patent lawsuit. And the company which owns the patent, which has not innovated on this technology and has no intention to, makes millions of dollars. So the patent system is kind of broken. So a 3-arbitrator panel awarded substantial damages to Jones Day, and Sovereign is now seeking to throw out that award. The exact figures are not known because both parties agreed to keep the information confidential, according to Sovereign's lawsuit. Whatever its amount, Sovereign lawyers are now asking for the award to be vacated. They say the panel disregarded the 2007 contract between the parties and implemented its own notion of what would be reasonable and fair without any semblance of contractual authorization, according to these reports from Ars Technica. So neither Jones Day nor Sovereign attorneys responded to requests for comment from Ars Technica on this particular case. So there's not really any information going farther than what we have right now on this particular case. So the patenting system is decidedly broken and has been for a really, really long time, actually. As it is now, there are a lot of things which really should be public domain, but are not. And you might say that the idea of public domain is actually kind of anti-libertarian, but I would disagree with that wholeheartedly. Now, what's happening with public domain is that information should be free for the taking for the most part. There are controls on, say, intellectual property. Now, there are ideas about intellectual property where perhaps intellectual property is an artificial construct. Maybe it shouldn't exist. I'm still on the fence about that, but intellectual property as it is now is a real thing. And if you've built a business under an idea, around an idea, and you patented that idea, sure, you should be able to recoup your losses. But the idea of public domain creates and not even artificially, it creates competition, which is essential to innovation. Think about it this way. What if the whole idea behind the internal combustion engine was solely owned by, say, the Ford Motor Company? And only the Ford Motor Company could make internal combustion engines and could make cars which run off of internal combustion engines. There'd be no innovation. It'd just be Ford cranking out internal combustion engine car after internal combustion engine car, and there'd be no innovation on it because you have no option other than to buy the Ford internal combustion engine car. We might still be using Model Ts today if that were the case. But fortunately, other companies popped up. You had Chrysler Fiat Group, which, well, what is now Chrysler Fiat. You have GM, unfortunately. You have Toyota, Nissan, Volvo, all these different, VW, of course, is very famous here. All these different car manufacturing companies which make internal combustion engine cars. And they're still allowed to do that because the idea itself of the internal combustion engine car is public domain, more or less. Now, the exact internal combustion engine car that's in the Model T is in fact patented. But imagine if Ford started suing any company ever that started using the basic idea of the internal combustion car. That's kind of what we're seeing now with patent trolling, where the online shopping cart is such a ubiquitous thing that it may as well be public domain. Every company ever that sells things online uses the shopping cart. The online shopping cart is just a ubiquitous idea. So to say that, oh, we own that idea is ridiculous. How do you own an idea anyway? You kind of can't really own an idea because once it's been shared, now someone else has seen it and someone else can build on it. Unless you put such tight controls on it that simply can't be done. And unfortunately, we're seeing government enforcement of these patents And we're seeing government propping up with this patent system that really is broken and doesn't work the way it should, and hasn't really for years and years, potentially hundreds of years. So it's very, very annoying how things are working out today, and it's stifling innovation. We actually have government enforcement of stifling of innovation, which is such a bizarre idea. Well, speaking of stifling, Microsoft is in a bit of trouble, not really legally, but with its users. See, Microsoft came out with Windows 10 maybe a few months ago, and it's been up for technical preview for like a year, but Windows 10 is here to stay. There's no doubting that. The problem with Windows 10 is that it has a lot of telemetry built in, surveillance built in that really we can't track very well because, of course, Windows 10 is closed source. We can't like look into the code and say, oh, this is what Microsoft does. But over its short lifetime, Windows 10 has already received quite a few cumulative updates that combine security fixes with a number of non-security bug fixes and perhaps even the occasional new feature. So that's to be expected. But the problem is some of it is actually tracking you if you use Windows 10. And some of that stuff has been backported to Windows 7. So even if you're fundamentally opposed to, say, your operating system tracking you, you have no option, even if you stay with Windows 7. So even if you disable the telemetry information that tracks you, you're still being tracked. Now, there's not really any way around being tracked online. Google tracks you, Facebook tracks you, Twitter probably tracks you, every website that has cookies tracks you. That's just how it is online these days. There's not really any getting around it until there's some sort of fundamental change in how we use the internet. But as of now, that's really not going away. But we can make an effort. There's open source projects that actually don't track you, believe it or not. There are open source operating systems that have no interest in tracking you called, Linux. And there's OpenBSD and all sorts of other things that can actually, not track you. And it actually keeps you private to some degree. So there are efforts out there, but they're not very mainstream yet. To say Linux is not mainstream might be a little bit misleading because Linux is used in most servers online. Apache servers are open source Linux, so to say that Linux is not mainstream might be a little bit incorrect. It's just that Linux is not widely recognized as being as important as it actually is. So that's something that has to be kept in mind. But Windows 10 does in fact track you, and sometimes in really creepy ways. The thing is, if you remember when you used to update Windows, if you have Windows and you used to update it, you would see release notes, which would tell you what's being updated. We don't have that anymore. With Windows 10, that sort of went away. So you just got a security update, and you're not really told what's in it. It's just security update number 50222. You don't get an actual description of what's being updated. And we're constantly being tracked by our operating systems now. This is not like crazy conspiracy theory, tinfoil hat stuff. It's well-documented fact that our operating systems are, in fact, tracking us. They say it's for market research, or it's for telemetry, or it's to make sure that you're not doing anything illegal on your computer. But isn't that really up to the police? Backdoors in our operating systems don't actually help anybody. It's just an excuse to control the market even more on a governmental side, on a law enforcement side. It's not actually helping anybody, and I very much doubt it's actually preventing any crimes. This is Digital Drive. I'm your host, Russell. We've been talking about technology and quite a bit more. Clutch with Keon Rose is up next, right here, Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240, and hotnewstalkradio.com. Be sure to get the TuneIn Radio app for your smartphone, hotnewstalkradio.com as well.
This is a mob mode. This is the mob mode.